Welcome everybody to the Big Top Tent and to this discussion on farming and carbon credits and the whole world of whether this is a great opportunity for farming or is it somewhat of a threat. So for those of you who may not know, my name is Tom Heap. I present on Countryfile and also Costing the Earth on Radio 4. Recently written a book too. Now coming here is quite interesting for me because if people talk about having roots in the soil, I was actually born pretty close to here. This is the closest event I've ever done to where I was born, which is a village called Bennington, which isn't very far. It says on my passport Stevenage, so I've got to, let's big it up for the Stevenage Massive here. Hey, very good. Nice to hear one or two of you in there. So proudly Stevenage on my passport. So it's nice to come back here. So carbon and farming, I think, could be very, very exciting. It could link some of the things which are absolutely crucial to our environment and land use today, and that is using our land as a tool to reduce greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, whilst at the same time not trying to do that at the expense of food production, which I think still, if you ask most people out there, is the core job of farming, which they expect farmers to deliver. Getting that balance right will be very, very tricky. In this subject, I find it very difficult to avoid the cowboy metaphors. I have to be honest, a lot of people say this is a bit of a Wild West. There's a bit of a bonanza out there. There's a bit of a gold rush. We need a new marshal in town, all these kind of things. I did think about having a little bit of an equivalent of a swear jar for anybody any time reached for a Wild West metaphor, but I thought I'd be filling it most of the time. And there is a reason, like all cliches, why it's there. And that's because it is a space in which it seems maybe that the opportunity and the money has perhaps come in front of the rules and regulations, and therefore there is a chance for things to go very well for some and perhaps less well for others. We have a very, very good panel here. They're going to do a little around 5-minute intro themselves, just setting out their stall. Then there'll be a few questions from me, but the main thing is to hear what you want for your questions and for you to get what you want out of the panel. So please do start thinking of some questions for yourself. So we're going to start with Antony Pearce, who is a farmer who I believe is engaged in the whole idea of locking more carbon into his soil and possibly getting paid for that. He farms in both Buckinghamshire and has also a partner farm in the Cotswolds. Then we have Singh-Watson, founder of Riverford Organics, who I think it's fair to say is a little bit more skeptical about the role that getting paid for storing carbon could have, if not, maybe hostile is too big a word. And then Andrew Voysey from Soil Capital, who are a regenerative agronomy company, and so are involved in financing this. And whilst he tells me he is not here to sell, he is here to educate. That is, of course, also the best salesmen say. So, without further ado, Antony, please, set out your stall.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Antony Pearce. I'm a commercial farmer from Buckinghamshire. We farm about 360 hectares of combinable crops. I split my farm after reading Gabe Brown and David Montgomery's books. And I was a little bit unsure about regenerative farming, so I split my farm 50-50. Half continues as a commercial, high-input, high-output farm, and the other half run on a pretty hardcore regenerative basis. There is a difference in margin as a result, and I've tried to build up the margin on the regenerative business with environmental schemes and carbon trading as a result. And that is really where my journey started into carbon trading. There have been some experiments along the line which have helped me justify my contribution. So, for example, last year we established cover crops, and I harvested my cover crops, calculated dry matter content, and tried to figure out how much carbon I was sequestering. So the reason behind this is I have a small YouTube channel, and I was trying to justify why it was worthwhile growing cover crops. So we calculated the dry matter, and from there I used a forest calculator as it happened, and the figure that it generated was sequestering about 4 tons of carbon a year, just from the cover crops. So that's where my journey started, and interestingly, when I went to trade my certificates through the platforms, that it produced a very similar number. So I feel justified that the behavior I implement on my farm is backing up the certificates that the platforms say I can trade. So that's my background.
Just a quick one to pick up. I mean, just because your dry matter is 4 tons, that could rot. That's not going to stay. That's not carbon locked up.
No, and obviously that depends on, you know, whether you have animals in your rotation and what mechanical establishment methods you have. So the platform takes all of that into account. I was just trying to get an idea from the cover crops, just that element of it, not to do with the machinery or the establishment or my other practices, just from that, what sort of level I was talking about.
And I gather you've committed to selling your soil carbon for at least a year, is that
That's correct. It's an annual certificate I trade.
How much?
As in what?
How much do you
money?
get?
So the platform that I use is there's a minimum price set of about £35 per certificate.
So a certificate is what, a ton? Or what
yeah, a ton.
Right.
Yeah, so, you know, then we're talking about a minimum price of, you know, £120 a hectare issue.
Right. Okay, and that helps to make up the profit margin difference that you mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah, I would say that probably puts it in a position where I am ahead of conventional.
Right, right. Okay, well, we've plenty more to ask you. Guy.
Good morning. Guy Singh-Watson. I'm the founder of Riverford Organic Farmers. Started growing organic vegetables 35 years ago on a very small scale, just on 3 acres. Today, we deliver about 80,000 vegetable boxes a week, turn over 100 million, and have 1,000 now co-owners. The business became employee-owned 4 years ago. My first look at the sort of carbon started in 2006, where working with Exeter University, we did a carbon footprint for the business. And I should start by saying at that time, we looked at an estimation of the impact of the actual farming activities and then everything post field gate right to the consumer. We deliver everything to the doorstep. And the initial study said that the 85% was post field gate. It would be very different for someone producing milk or beef, but for vegetables, it is largely in the distribution, the impact in terms of carbon. And it was a 2-year study, and it was a management tool. It was not an audit. It was peer reviewed, the science, but it was a management tool which led us to reduce the kind of intensity of what we were doing. So we'd never air freighted stuff, but there were a few things which were just completely bonkers when you look at the carbon footprint. Air freight is definitely one of them, so we undertook that we never would. Heating greenhouses is a complete insanity environmentally. It really shouldn't be legal anywhere in the world. And it's 10 times better to buy an imported pepper from Spain than it is to grow it with Heap in this country. Made a little bit better if you're using combined heat and power, but it's still better to buy an imported one. And a lot of other management things like, managing our cold rooms better, fitting, energy efficient light bulbs and all those sorts of things. So that was back in 2006. There was no methodology when we started. We kind of built it from first principles working with Exeter University. And while we were doing the study, the methodology started emerging, and we had to kind of change our practices to fit in with other little bit parallels with what's going on with soil at the moment, I think. And then recently, Zach, would you mind just standing up and waving your hand? Zach is our sustainability guy. Any technical questions about numbers, come and find Zach afterwards, because I've left it all to him over the last few years. And I think we started in 2019 doing a more formal and exhaustive carbon footprint, looking at some of our field emissions, and indeed now we buy from probably 30 or 40 growers in the UK, and probably 15 substantially in Spain, some in Italy, some in France, and some further afield. And I think we're definitely now going to have to look at our Scope 3 emissions and what's going on those farms, something that I feel very uncomfortable about.
Just define Scope 3 for this audience, please.
Oh, blimey, Zach, please.
Supply chain.
It's the sort of supply chain, the stuff that you're responsible for. I believe there is even an argument that we should be including the supply chain right through to our customers, and when they cook it.
Yeah. I mean,
unsure about this. I think some of these, like the soil again, you know, I think these are emerging, you know, how we should be treating Scope 3. It would be huge for us, and you know, and how we would measure it would be extremely difficult going onto those farms. And I feel very uncomfortable pressurizing farmers to adopt practices or. And then there's the whole insetting thing. There was a discussion on the stage yesterday about whether the retailers, which I guess is us now, you know, whether we start pinching the credits, you know, pressurizing our suppliers to effectively, you know, take the credits from them. I'm not quite sure where we are on that. Have I said enough, Tom? Do you want me to stop?
The thing I'm keen to know is, do you think you should be paid for the carbon that you keep in your soil or increase in your soil?
No, I guess. I feel fundamentally, it's almost a kind of philosophical thing that the whole commercialization of nature, I find deeply offensive. The idea that we can only value something, you know, if we put a price tag on it, and you know, I think that's reflected in the way our government behaves about all sorts of things. But it is kind of the only show in town, so I'm kind of reluctantly going along with it. I've been reassured somewhat by coming to this event and talking to people who are measuring carbon. I mean, one of my objections is that I'm deeply unconvinced by the precision of those measurements. And I'm sorry, Antony, you've done nothing to reassure me, but perhaps you, you know, you know, if you've got a fiver in your pocket, it's a fiver. You know what it is. I mean, soil carbon, we just don't. And how people are buying this stuff, I mean, when it's so dodgy, and ultimately, it is going to depend on citizens' acceptance. I hate to use the word consumer, but you know, that's where the value of it ultimately is going to come from. I mean, whether it's government or whether it's you know, supermarkets or whatever, they have to be convinced of it. And I'm guessing that there are very few people in this room who are convinced of it, other than those who are actually trading it. When I talk about carbon offset and trading to almost anyone, you can see they're just glazing over, and just, that is bullshit. I mean, that is, you know, so you're going to have a lot of trouble selling that to, you're going to have a lot of trouble selling that to citizens, voters, food buyers, I think. You've got a bit of an uphill struggle, I think.
There we go. There's a nice platform for you to take on, Andrew.
Well done for asking a nice, gentle problem.
Yeah. So tell us why we should be commoditising this.
Well, my name's Andrew, and the first thing I need to declare is that I'm a customer for now of Guy.
Damn.
We'll review that in an hour. My name's Andrew Voysey. I work for a regenerative agronomy company called Soil Capital. We'll get into all of the meaty topics, some of which you've raised, I'm sure, in the Q&A, but I think what's maybe helpful just in the first few minutes is to explain how we as a company came to the position where we now do run a carbon payment program. We were founded nearly 10 years ago by a farmer, an agronomist, and an entrepreneur. And what brought them together was the shared realization that there are ways to improve soil health and carbon sequestration and farm profitability hand in hand. And this has a lot to do with, you know, operational costs and managing risk and maintaining yield and so on. And I know we've all talked a lot about this, and there are right, there are good ways and bad ways to transition practices and so on, but right at the heart of why Soil Capital was founded 10 years ago was the belief that we can make farms more profitable and better for soil health and the broader environment hand in hand. And we worked as farm advisors and even land managers right around the world testing this hypothesis for ourselves, and in a variety of different soil and climate conditions and cultural and market conditions, and satisfied ourselves that with the right knowledge and support, that can be achieved. But then we reached a point of acute frustration, because having demonstrated that to ourselves, that the economics and the environmental performance can be delivered together, we sort of looked around our small business, we were 6 or 7 people at that point, and realized that we really weren't persuading multiple farmers at scale to take the risk of changing practices as well and to follow us. And as a business, we're motivated by having as big an impact on scaling regenerative agriculture as possible. And so we sort of came to the carbon payment piece out of frustration, that we weren't persuading enough farmers at enough scale to make the practice changes that are in our view, their interests, but also in wider societal interest as well. And so we looked at the various different positive outcomes of healthier soil, which we all, I won't preach to this crowd about that, but we selected carbon as a starting point where it is hard to measure, but it's easier than some of the other outcomes, and where there is a lot of work to build a marketplace and market alignment and standards and so on. There's a lot still to do, but we felt that it was a nearer term possibility to have the market in different ways value carbon improvements as an outcome of better soil health. And so we decided as a business to focus on carbon as a starting point, not because we have carbon tunnel vision, to steal someone's question later. And we brought to market in 2020 Europe's first certified and multinational carbon payment program for arable farmers. So fast forward, we're now working with over 500 farmers in the UK, in France, and in Belgium. We're not enabling offsetting. We're working only in the food and beverage value chain. So the Scope 3 space, where the buyers of the crops are also looking for ways to work with their farmer suppliers to reduce their carbon footprint. And maybe just the final couple of things I'll say to sort of tee us up is that we retain the view that carbon revenue, carbon payments, are the cherry on the cake, to use a really good Groundswell pun, the cherry on the cake of a transition to regenerative agriculture. So we see a lot of the hype around carbon values and so on, and we try to be a bit more cool and level-headed about that and see the broader operational and economic opportunity for farmers. And this stuff is real, is my final closing remark. Obviously, lots of different parties are out there at different stages of development. We've just paid our first cohort of French and Belgian farmers for their first year of externally verified carbon improvements. About 100 farmers, nearly €1 million of revenue from the food and agri supply chain, so an average of about €10,000 per farm. So, and there's lots to learn and improve, and I'll be the first to say that and be quite open about that. But at the same time, it is real. It can be done.
Okay. Can I, just a point of clarification, so we've all understood. So just how the money works. So who pays you for what? How does that work?
So farmers are generating carbon certificates
Yep.
in proportion to the improvements they make on their carbon footprint, to be simplistic about it.
Yep.
Those certificates are purchased by companies, in our case, in the food supply chain.
And what are they buying them? You said it wasn't offsetting, so what are they actually paying for?
They're paying for the farmers in our program are in the supply chains
Right.
of these food and beverage companies. A company like...
So Danone, for instance, let's just say, is able to say our carbon footprint is lower, because our supply chain farmers have done this.
It's exactly the problem Guy raised about having to consider his supply chain as a business, Riverford. Yeah. Danone, AB InBev, Cargill, these companies we work with are in the same position of having to measure and then reduce their supply chain emissions. And they want credible and verified ways increasingly to do that.
They will pay to reduce the carbon in their supply chain.
Yes.
Thank you. Please start thinking of your questions. Antony, there was a point made about the reliability of measurement. Can you kind of give us some evidence? Presumably you've got a field, it's got soil in it, you take a baseline measurement and then something changes. But talk me through that.
Okay, so I think from a farmer's perspective, this is very important because fundamentally we are farmers, we are not carbon scientists. So as far as the platform that we work through, we put our practices through, and it runs an algorithm which compares our practices to regional practices. And then it will sample random samples of the farms involved, and then your figures, your benchmarks versus the benchmarks of the industry. So, and it compares the two levels and generates a certificate based on the difference between the two levels.
Okay, but so I rather hoped you were going to say actually measured your soil and then came back next year and saw there was soil carbon improvement. That would be something people could trust.
We do that for ourselves, but it's unless you're geostationary sampling and the fact that the labs aren't that consistent, it makes repeatability very challenging.
Ugh, I'm beginning to feel like I'm standing on a duvet already.
Yeah.
On a what?
Fitting.
Yeah, well, Guy, yeah.
I'd be interested how it works with your conventional half of the farm. I mean, do you have to look at it on a whole farm basis? Or because you could just be stealing carbon from your conventional farm, bringing all the straw and the muck over and putting it on and how does that work? That's
a very good point. Andrew, I'm sure, would have a comment about carbon leakage, I think the official term is. So we have two physically separate businesses, one owned by my dad, one owned by me. My farm is in the carbon trading platform. All of my land has to be in the scheme to stop any leakage. My father's farm can go and do what he likes. I'm sure a lot of the audience understands that.
Very, very quickly, Andrew, yeah.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of points been raised and I wanted to just close the loop. So within the Soil Capital program, we do use a model called the Cool Farm Tool that the food and agriculture sector has built up over many years, combined with soil analysis at the beginning and the end of a 5-year period. So just to sort of put that out there, we are all quite familiar, I think, with the debate about do you model, do you measure? They've both got their flaws, none of them are perfect, and just to sort of give the highlight of how we approach that. And yes, on the carbon leakage side, I think this is one of those areas that isn't actually talked about. I'm glad you've raised it because it's not one of the top 5 FAQs, but the idea that maybe we can do carbon trading just by putting a single field into a scheme, I think raises huge questions about the opportunity for cheating, and that's why we insist on the whole farm going in.
I'm going to throw it to the audience, but I'm just going to put one to Guy. I mean, I don't think we should be too sort of sanctimonious about this. You yourself almost suggested that this was something you might do, but hold your nose to do it, because you did acknowledge that, money talks in farming.
Yeah, you pretty much summed it up, yeah. Right. We are even financing a tree planting scheme in Ethiopia. I mean, we're not, correct me if I'm wrong, Zach, but I don't think we're buying the credits. It's with a charity, Send the Cow, that we've worked with for 20 years, and I love what they do. And this scheme in particular will unquestionably sequester carbon. It will also deliver food and social improvements as well. I'm not quite sure what we think we're going to do with those credits. I think they are being externally verified. So yeah, holding my nose a little bit, but it's, we're in there.
Very good. Yes, we've got our first question, a lady right here.
Hello, Hannah Jones from the Farm Carbon Toolkit. Thank you very much for the opportunity to ask a question. Just thinking about food price, I'd like to ask any which one of the panel their view of the idea of polluter pays. Historically, food has been subsidised, and then the general public are paying taxpayers' money to actually clear up some of the pollution that's commonly associated with water, for example. So if we take that the next step forward with respect to carbon, is there scope to reinvent the carbon credits and think about, so if you are emitting a lot of carbon, that the price of that food actually goes up, and the food, that would follow all the way through to the food chain. I'd just be interested in your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it is a very big point you make, that food growth should include the whole cost of its environmental impact, which would include its carbon impact. I'm going to start with Guy. Do you think that should be in the price of food, or is that just wishful thinking?
I think it should be, but I also think it's wishful thinking. It's not happening anywhere in the world. The solution to climate change is really simple, and it does involve the polluter paying. 89% of climate change is driven by burning fossil fuels. Tax the fossil fuels. The OECD, the IMF, 300 international highly acclaimed economists agree that this would reduce, I think the figure is global emissions by 30% in the first 10 years. You know, if you charge it as something like I think they were charging it something like $20 a ton. I mean, morally, intellectually, it's so obvious what we should do, but there's no political appetite for doing it. We're not doing that, so any idea that you're going to include, you know, the environmental cost of food production in the price, I mean, if we can't do something as obvious as taxing fossil fuels, I don't think there's much hope of
Well, we are, of course, getting the price increase in fossil fuels without taxation at the moment, and of course, as we know, there are massive social justice implications as a result.
I've got to just take you up on that. This report from the OECD is you take all that money and you distribute it in a universal payment, which would leave every person below the median income £700 a year better off. So that is just, yeah.
Very good. Andrew, I mean, you mentioned that carbon was, in effect, the starting point, or the cherry, perhaps one of the easier ones to monetize in this journey. Has there been any success in trying to monetize these other aspects of the environmental impact of farming?
Yeah, I think there's plenty of examples around the show here today where people are starting to see that coming through. My actual response to the question, you know, philosophically, my starting point is the same as Guy's, wanting to see it but finding it hard to see the political appetite. And I think one of the big component of this, which I know there was a big conversation about the food strategy yesterday, is the connection to the health agenda and how much we spend on health and how that's fallen away from the political focus. I think that's a huge missed opportunity, which is all part of this, because health and food touch all of us so much, you know, every day.
Okay, thank you. Gentleman just here.
Hi, Jack Thompson from WikiLeaks magazine. So you're getting money from companies like Cargill, who are associated with some of the worst environmental damages around the world, and you're expecting farmers to do good work for them. So why should they be allowed to do that and not do the work in their supply chain first?
Thank you. I'm sorry, I missed the name of the company that you were focusing on.
WikiLeaks magazine.
No, the company that you were accusing of offsetting.
Cargill.
Target.
Cargill.
Cargill, I'm so sorry. Thank you, yes, of course, relevant in this space. Yes, so are you letting Cargill off the hook?
Well, yeah, nicely provocative question, but I fully agree with the premise of it, which is that, of course, Cargill should be doing, and all other food companies should be cleaning up their supply chains all around the world. You know, I know Cargill has been, as a company, very embedded in, sorry, I can't quite see, in you know, tropical forest destruction and the beef industry, and I know that they would have their own views on what they've done to combat that. I didn't say at any point that I endorse, you know, what they do or don't do in Latin America.
But the implication is, I mean, this is the perennial offsetting question, isn't it? It's whether you're excusing bad behavior or compensating for bad behavior.
So maybe to repeat, we're not enabling any food companies to offset their emissions and ignore their supply chain. We're working within their supply chains in just the same way that we could work with Riverford and your growers that supply to you. We're in between there, applying the quantification and the verification to allow you to have confidence that the growers in your supply chain have indeed improved practices and reduced their carbon footprint in a measurable way. So maybe that didn't come across clearly. We're working fully in their European supply chains. As a business, we don't work.
Well, yeah, thank you. You made your point about Cargill's. Yes, lady over there, thank you.
I'm Kate Hughes. I'm a consumer affairs editor for The Independent, but I'm also a regenerative commercial farmer on Exmoor. We've already touched on this idea that for any of this to have a value and an endpoint, the consumer has to be taken on this journey with us or with you. How do you anticipate that consumers will not be in a position where they find this simply another piece of evidence that farmers are taking the mick?
Antony, are you taking the mick? I mean, how do you show it's robust to your mates down the pub, or perhaps not your mates, but general public down the pub?
I'm quite happy with that, in the fact that, really picking up on the lady's point earlier, I have two farming systems. One is high input, high output, and the big carbon footprint comes from the application of fertilizer. Mm-hmm. If I'm adopting regenerative practices that are plant-based, we're talking about a drop of nitrogen application from 200 kilos to less than 50. We're talking a stepped change in that. I'm quite happy, and ignoring the fact that these practices contribute to carbon, we also do bird counts to prove that the apex predator numbers are improving as well. So I feel completely justified showing anybody around the farm and saying, these practices lead to these improvements.
Quickly, Andrew, yeah.
Quickly, I think I understood the premise of the question, but I'm not sure. Apologies if I didn't. But we have a protocol that underpins all that we do. That protocol was developed against an international third-party standard. So it's not a standard that we control or influence, from the ISO family. And everything that Antony's just talked about in terms of his practices is audited each year by another third party, a German auditor, to verify, including documentary evidence that he has to provide, that what has been measured and modeled can be proven. And so, we go through great lengths to use external standards, to use external auditors. The certificates that are generated are then publicly listed on a searchable third-party registry. I'm sure we haven't got it all right and perfect, and I hope that tone is coming across really clearly, that sort of humbleness. But if the premise of your question is, this is all a big black box and consumers are being asked to trust what Antony says and so on, well, the design of our system is going to, as many lengths as possible, to apply external scrutiny standards, transparency.
Given that, Guy, why do you think there's a sort of danger of a mis-selling scandal almost, is what you're saying?
Yeah, of course, even if you could measure it properly, which as I say, I'm getting slightly more convinced of, that didn't stop the kind of mis-selling of mortgages in the States, which brought us into a global sort of collapse in 2008, and that's with something that's fairly precisely measured. So I think there is the potential for it to go very, very wrong. As a matter of fact, what Antony's doing, it does seem to make complete sense, and I don't see why he shouldn't be paid for it. You could kind of look at it another way, that he should be charged for what he does on the other farm. Yeah. I think might be a more sensible way of looking at it, but my problem is more the other end. Now, maybe I had too many pints last night, because I still don't understand that Andrew's not offsetting, but maybe on a better day I would. But it's the other end of it that bothers me, is when you go on the website to offset your flight to New York, and someone's telling you it's okay because some carbon credit has been generated somewhere. Not in this particular scheme, but there are plenty of websites doing it, and they are all really, really dodgy. It's kind of that end, and I think someone's already asked a question about, or maybe it was you, Tom, about it kind of making people feel it's okay to carry on polluting and not take responsibility for their actions. That's what bothers me more.
I don't want to get too sidetracked down the whole kind of validity of offsets or not, because I think it's a slightly separate. I was trying to get this guy here in the grey sweatshirt. I'm so sorry if I've nicked it off you in the hat. Maybe I'll try and come back to you in a minute.
Hello. My name's Patrick Greenfield. I'm an environment reporter with The Guardian. I have a question for Andrew. At the moment, we're seeing cryptocurrency markets crash. And a little while ago, my friends, several people were told, this is real. And that's what that's your pitch today. And we're finding actually, as we go, when there's proper science behind these third-party verifiers that you rely on, everyone relies on, often it's not real. And a lot of people will make a lot of money, but there will also be a scientific reckoning at some point in this world. How are you prepared for that, to make sure farmers aren't hurt in the process?
I think fundamentally by being open and not saying that we've got everything perfect and going on that learning journey together. Now, when I said this is real, what I was trying to communicate and convey is that, this year, last year at Groundswell, everyone is full of questions about this new marketplace and is it right to exist and so on. And all I was trying to say is money has been earned by farmers for putting in place practices that we will all agree are practices that we want to see more of.
And how certain are you that those farmers absorbed carbon dioxide that they wouldn't have done otherwise, i.e. climate change has been, albeit a tiny bit, slowed?
So this is the additionality question. You haven't used the technical jargon.
Well, it doesn't need technical jargon. It's actually whether it's working to help the climate.
Yeah, of
That's
course,
what we're asking.
Of course. But I raise it because it's a word that's often on people's minds, and that sort of triggers the question. So we have two profiles of farmer that joins our program. One will be overall net emitting based on their practices today. And for them to generate any carbon certificates and any revenue, they have to improve against their personal baseline. So that is having a clear climate benefit in both reducing emissions and increasing storage in the soil. One of the things we do a bit differently, though, is when a farmer joins and they are already maybe an early adopter of some of these practices, they're net storing carbon today. As long as the science behind the model tells us that they continue to add carbon to their soil, they don't need, in our program, to continue to find new practices to adopt.
Yeah.
If the system is saying that they are continuing to add and keep carbon in their soil, that is rewardable as well.
I mean, your latter point addresses the prodigal son question, which does sort of dog this field, is are you going to reward those who've been trashing their soil for the last 2 decades because it's easier for them to improve? I acknowledge that is a problem. But just before Guy comes in, you didn't actually ask the question. How convinced are you that those farmers who've got nearly €1 million have absorbed more carbon dioxide than they would have done otherwise?
Well, I am convinced because...
Excellent.
And I was explaining the methodology behind my confidence.
Okay. Thank you.
There is a moral issue, isn't there, about people who have been adopting good practice. I mean, some of our fields have 12% carbon in them, and so, effectively we're being kind of penalised.
Yeah, well, that's...
because we're going to be competing with people who are raising their carbon, and, you might just say, well, tough luck, and
How much does that hurt?
Oh, it does piss me off quite a lot, yeah. But, I mean, DEFRA have only ever funded, the change, haven't they?
Yeah.
And the market is only ever going to do this. So I think there's very little hope that we're going to be paid for our bygone
good behaviour
virtue.
over the last 3 decades.
And I think we're just going to have to suck that up. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, lady over there.
Hi, I'm Helena Black. I'm an honorary research fellow at the James Hutton Institute, and I'm a member of the UK Farm Soil Carbon Code Consortium. And I've got a statement to make and a question for the panel. So I'm a soil scientist. You give me enough money and I will measure your change in your soil carbon, because it can be done. But you've pointed out it is about what is currently available out there in the market and how measurements are made. And I think there has to be a change in how we measure soil carbon stock, because we've all been measuring our soil carbon and organic matter. And we're now looking at a very different thing. we're looking at measuring soil carbon stock and greenhouse gas emission reductions. So my question to the panel is, how useful is it going to be for you to have a set of minimum standards that would allow us to compare soil capital with Verra methodology and others, so that we know when one farmer reduces their carbon by 10 tonnes per hectare, it's the same 10 tonnes per hectare as their next door neighbour? Because that is what we're trying to do in the consortium, is actually develop a set of standards by which we can compare across the piece. So, leave it to you.
Thank you. Antony.
I'd be very happy because it would alleviate the first question, and I could say, there you go, my practices have delivered a tangible improvement. So from my point of view, very supportive.
Yeah. Would that work for you?
I'd be very supportive. The Janet from DEFRA argument, which was fairly kind of persuasive that it wasn't right to lay this down yet. Actually, having spoken to Alan this morning, I don't believe that. I think that's a product of an ideology that we have to look to the marketplace for every solution, which is just ridiculous.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Hi, Owen Langham. I'm here independently, just throwing myself into the space until the planet's saved. I was just wondering, do you anticipate the integration of blockchain and decentralized finance into the ecological and carbon credit trading space? For example, by establishing an ecological data on an open blockchain, it could allow farmers to sell their credits directly to the highest bidder in an immutable, transparent manner. This could skip the middleman and empower the farmer through direct ownership of their credits. And I just wonder what your thoughts with this on, and are you making any plans to look into this? As it's seemingly, in the long term, potentially an unstoppable wave, which it would help to anticipate. Thank you.
Thank you. When I hear the word blockchain, I always feel slightly uneasy. So
I was just going to say, let me jump on the blockchain
hoping that Andrew's going to help
hand
me out.
Grenade. I think the question was, do we anticipate? I mean, you can already see in the States, in the US, that this is starting to happen. And I personally have two simple thoughts about your question. One is, on the plus side, blockchain technology does help with data integrity and security through complex supply chains or ecosystems, and there is a need to bring much more trust into this space, so that's good, but it's like a conveyor belt.
Yeah, sorry, for those that don't get it, as I understand, the significance of blockchain is it gives you particular sort of verifiable watermark authority on kind of what your product at the beginning that you can trace through to the end. I mean, that's terribly
yes, I won't pretend to be more expert than you, but I think it's a good way to...
So in theory, it adds some sort of reliability and trust.
Yes, yes.
Sorry, your other point.
But the other problem is, like any sort of data management system, garbage in, garbage out. You know, if you shove crap data in and it's protected through its journey through a system, it's still crap data when it comes out. And so, you know, the questions that we've raised about, you know, quantification of what's actually happening on farm, for me, come first before we get too carried away with locking that into a blockchain.
Yep. Briefly, yes.
I think the further the buyer gets from the seller in any transaction, food or biodiversity or carbon, the more confident you need to be in whatever quantification you're needing, and I don't think we're anywhere near that. Certainly with biodiversity, it just does my head in, even the concept of it, you know, how you value an earthworm against a barn owl, you know, ludicrous.
Thank you. Yes, madam.
Annie Brown, I'm a traditional mixed farmer on the South Downs. We've done our first hit at a farm carbon toolkit. The livestock aspect is the real baddie for us, and yet we're looking after chalk grassland, which is perceived as a sort of Europe's answer to the rainforest. What can we do? And suckler cows, I'm told, are a double baddie because you've got the mother and the calf. So what can we do on the livestock side to look after that aspect of our habitat?
Sorry, but before you sit down, presumably your problem is that your existing farm techniques are responsible for a lot of greenhouse gases because you got cattle. But presumably you could still improve that or change that in some way and therefore be eligible for some kind of payment within this system? Is that what you're asking? How could you improve it? Is that?
Yeah, no, I mean, at the moment, the toolkit we used didn't take any account of the permanent grassland that we've got, which is half of our farm. So that is something, and it's very shallow soil on the downs. There's very little of it. So, is there perceived to be a sequestration value in that grassland that we could use, or what else can we do to?
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Andrew, this is going to come to you. Could you make a package, make a case for this lady, I suppose?
Today, no, we serve arable farmers only. That's kind of a product of two things. One is we're a business, we're trying to build step by step. We started with arable. But the other reason we didn't jump into the livestock space, I think, gets to the heart of your question, which is that different forms of grazing management and pasture management are going to have different impacts on sequestration. At the same time, grass that's been there, pasture that's been there for a long time may have reached an equilibrium in terms of soil carbon, and we, I think, all need reliable, credible ways to quantify that before we can jump into payments for improvements. And that's the challenge we're searching desperately for answers to.
A very quick one, guys, if you can. Excellent. Eyeball the lady and make a contact. Excellent. Yes, guys.
We do have a scheme at Riverford where we are funding largely a livestock grazing area, South Devon. We were funding farmers to plant nut trees. It's a kind of customers sponsoring a tree. I mean, we are looking at, I don't know how far we got down the road of trying to quantify the carbon. It seems incredibly difficult. There doesn't seem to be any methodology that would give us any precision at all on it yet, but we are looking at trying to set some fairly, probably quite broad parameters of what that might be.
Thank you. We're getting very close, so keep your questions punchy, please. Yes, sir?
Thank you. Tom, first of all, I was going to say thank you for doing the 39 Ways to Save the Planet series. It's been excellent and really enjoyed that.
Best question yet.
Well, he's given me the perfect platform. I was going to say earlier, I'll be signing the book after this event in the bookstore over there, so please roll up. I promise you I've never met this gentleman before. Right, go.
The big picture question. 6,000 years ago, CO2 in the atmosphere was bumbling around about 280 parts per million. We've got it now up to 420 parts per million. The rate we're adding CO2 to the atmosphere is still accelerating. If we're lucky enough, we come to Groundswell in 2042, we might be in this big top 10 again, where will the CO2 level be? And I'm really asking the question, are we basically moving the deck chairs around on the Titanic a bit, and the bigger picture is...
Thank you very much. Antony, I'm going to come to you on this, because one of the things, and is that, funnily enough, in doing that series and writing that book, I'm quite convinced that there are some pretty quick wins to be gained in the way we farm in terms of absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And I've been to some probably like yours, very effective arable farms who are taking in a lot of carbon.
Well, I have to agree with you there. In fact, rather than cultivating land, leaving cultivated land open over the winter versus broadcasting small seeds in and having mustard standing at 5 foot by the end of October, there can be no argument that those plants haven't done their role whilst they've been growing. And for me, that's
no argument they haven't, so they have done their role. Sorry, these are the double negatives there. Yep.
They have done their role up until October. So for me, that's,
So the gentleman's question, do you think we'll be higher or lower in our carbon in 2042? It's just a higher or lower. It's like Bruce Forsyth.
David Montgomery, if the world's farmers did it, we'd be the same place or lower.
Obviously, we're going to be higher. We're stuffed, I mean, we're moving and the tragedy of it is that we've got the solutions. We know how to solve this. Technically, it's so doable. Maybe it would cost 3% of GDP. I mean, we'd barely notice, and it's so ridiculous. COP26, the lack of political will to act is just, I mean.
Andrew, higher or lower 2042?
Higher.
Right. Will you have helped to keep it a little bit lower?
I'm deeply personally motivated by making sure that the answer to your question is not, massively higher, or I've built my entire life around doing my best to contribute to that. Two things strike me. there are a whole spectrum of ways to suck CO2 out of the atmosphere. Some of them are very achievable, affordable, and doable now, as opposed to needing sort of hard engineering solutions that don't exist. That's why we're all in this tent. Can we do more of it, please? Secondly, as climate change escalates further, we will all experience, as we know, more volatile weather, more rain, less rain, rain at the wrong time. Healthy soil with more carbon in, as we all know, helps us in that context.
Yeah.
So your question is perfectly valid, your answer is perfectly right, but let's keep going and do it quicker.
Absolutely.
Yep, okay. I'm afraid we've just got time for probably one more question. Yep, lady in the white shirt.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I'm Rosemary. I'm a researcher at the Centre for Agroecology, Water and Resilience. My question, I guess, is, history has shown us that having an overly narrow focus on just one aspect of a system often leads to unintended, often quite bad consequences. And what about the other, often more potent greenhouse gas emissions like nitrous oxide and methane that are also huge aspects of the farming system? And having a narrowly focus on carbon, I think, we can often miss those aspects.
Just a quick clarification. I guess they both rolled into your, or certainly nitrous oxide is rolled
We're
in.
using carbon in this conversation, I think, in shorthand.
Yeah.
We're
CO2e.
covering all of the greenhouse gases, modeled, converted into units of CO2 equivalent. So
I'm going to leave the last word to you on this, Antony, because you talked about other environmental goods on your farm. Do you sometimes feel, when you're getting paid for carbon, that you're getting sucked down a road that might be bad for something else environmentally or societally?
No, certainly not. My focus is very much on nature-based solutions. Coming back to many ways to engineer CO2 out of the environment, I don't need to. Mother Nature's already done it. Just grow a big plant, leave the plant to do its thing. It will reward the earthworms, the microbes, improve your soil health, improve water infiltration. I'm quite confident that the principles and practices that we put in place deliver round environmental benefits, and as a result, we also cut down on our fertilizer and pesticide applications. So all round, I'm quite hand on heart happy.
And just a quick one to you, and forgive me, a little chairman's prerogative. Does it? I assume the half of your land that you're in, you're getting paid for carbon storage. It produces slightly less food.
Yes.
Does that bother you?
At the moment, especially with the Ukraine situation, yes. But having said that, we've moved to a lot more human food rather than animal food as a result.
Fair point.
So I feel justified.
Yeah, and I'm just going to put that to you as well, Guy. I mean, we're sort of coming off maybe since 2007 or 8 when we had the last sort of food price crisis until now, when the sort of availability and the quantity of food globally wasn't an issue, and so that arguably allows other priorities like carbon to rise. What do you think, looking to the future? Do you think that we're going to have, concentrate on the simply amount of food again? Is that going to become a priority, which could interfere in this conversation?
No, I don't think. I think we're a long way from that. As Henry Dimbleby said, we produce, more than enough food to feed the world, even with the ridiculous levels of wastage. People go hungry because of wars and poor government on the whole, not because farmers aren't growing enough.
And so the whole narrative of storing more carbon, using our farms, whether we get paid for it or not, but using our land to suck up more carbon can and should continue.
Yes, I'm not a big fan of large-scale tree planting or rewilding for that matter. Actually, what Antony's doing seems to make much more sense, but probably trying to do it in a more, diverse way with, more different crops and perhaps some tree crops within it as well. But I think, yes, definitely combining producing food with getting those environmental gains, and I think that's quite doable.
Well, thank you very much to all of you for coming in. Nice to see a really, really full tent, even when it's not raining outside. Fantastic. And thanks to our panel, for who I'm sure you'll agree it was a very, very lively and informative discussion. So please put your hands together for the panel.